Why You Can't Find Your Purpose. Carl Jung. Jung observed that the very people who chase a purpose the hardest are often the ones who cannot feel one, and there is a reason for that, which we are about to open together by the fire tonight. Here is where we begin. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung wrote, "The sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being." And I want you to notice what he did not say. He did not say the purpose of existence is to find a purpose. He said to kindle a light, a small act, a fire tended, not a destination arrived at. And Jung would stop you right there and say, do you see it? You have been treating purpose like a lost object, something misplaced in a drawer of your life that you simply have not searched hard enough to find, when the truth he pointed to is stranger and kinder. The light is not lost, it is unkindled, and no amount of searching lights a fire, only tending does period. So let us be honest with each other for a moment, before any teaching, because I do not think you are the only one who has sat with a full calendar and an empty chest, who has climbed toward a goal and found the air thinner instead of clearer at the top, who has asked, quietly, is this all, and felt almost ashamed to ask it. You are not broken for asking that, and you are not alone in the asking. This is one of the most common quiet griefs of a modern life, and Jung gave it a name we will use tonight. Here is a small first-person reflection before we go further. I admit that I have been searching for purpose as though it were hiding from me. I admit that the search itself has left me more tired than the days without one. I stop looking for a thing to find, and I make the unconscious conscious. Say it with me. I stop looking for a thing to find, and I make the unconscious conscious. Again, I stop looking for a thing to find, and I make the unconscious conscious. And if this way of teaching is useful to you, I would gently invite you to subscribe, simply so tomorrow's sitting by this fire finds its way to you as well. Before the first key, if something in what I just said landed somewhere true in you, type the words "face it" in the comments. Just those two words. Let it be a small marker that you are still here, still willing to look. The first key is that purpose was never a thing to be found. Jung taught that what he called the general neurosis of our age is not a chemical imbalance, and not a personal failing. It is the senselessness and aimlessness of their lives. A phrase he used in his writing collected in volume 16, and he meant it plainly. When a life has no sense of direction, the psyche itself grows sick with it. Not sick the way a body is sick the way a room grows stale when no window has been opened in years. And here is the reversal. You have likely spent months or years treating this staleness as a search problem, as though somewhere out there is the correct job, the correct city, the correct relationship, that once located will hand you the missing sense of direction. But Jung would say this gently and firmly. It is not a search problem, it is a kindling problem. Purpose is not discovered the way a traveler discovers a coastline. Purpose is kindled the way a fire is kindled, from material already in your hands, tended with attention you have been spending instead on the horizon. Imagine someone who has read every book on finding their calling, who has taken the assessments, who has made the vision boards, who has changed cities twice chasing a feeling that keeps arriving somewhere just past the next decision. And each time the new city, the new job, the new relationship settles into ordinary life, the same quiet flatness returns within months, and they conclude they simply have not searched hard enough yet. When the truth is stranger, they were never missing a location, they were missing a practice. Think of a Tuesday, an ordinary one. You wake, you scroll, you go to work, you do the tasks competently. You come home, you eat, you scroll again, you sleep. Nothing in that day was wrong, and nothing in that day was lit. That is the aimlessness Jung named. Not crisis, just absence. And the absence does not announce itself with drama, it just quietly hums underneath everything. And notice how differently that same Tuesday reads, once you stop asking it to contain a destination. The coffee made slowly, instead of gulped standing at the counter. The walk to the car taken with your eyes actually open to the light on the pavement. The one message answered with real presence instead of a reflexive thumb. None of these change the shape of the day. They change whether the day was tended or merely survived. And that difference, small and repeatable, is the entire distinction Jung was pointing to when he chose the word kindle over the word find. A found thing is either there or it is not. But a kindled thing depends entirely on whether you showed up with the match. So the first shift is simply this. Stop asking where is my purpose, and start asking where in today did I let something matter, even a little, even for 10 minutes. That is not a smaller question, it is the true one. I stop hunting the horizon and start tending what is already in my hands. The second key is that success and meaning are not the same currency, and this is where so many good, capable, accomplished people get caught. Jung saw this constantly in his consulting room, and he said in a broadcast in 1959, "Man cannot stand a meaningless life." He meant it almost clinically, not as poetry, but as diagnosis. Imagine a man, a composite, because this is the shape of many. He built the career, met every marker, the promotion, the house, the family photograph that looks correct in every frame. And yet some evenings he feels something he cannot name, thinner and colder than sadness, a kind of static. Let me walk his week. Monday he closes a deal that took months, and the relief is gone by Tuesday morning, replaced by ordinary grey. Wednesday, a colleague congratulates him, and the thanks lands on the outside of him only, never reaching in. Thursday, he sits in his own driveway for 11 minutes before going inside. Not because anything is wrong, simply because he cannot think of a reason to want to open the door. Friday, he tells himself this is tiredness. Next quarter will feel different. And this is the exact sentence Jung would stop him on, because he has said it for years, and the feeling never arrives on schedule. This is the trap. We are taught meaning is a byproduct of achievement, that enough acquiring will pay it out like interest on a principal. But achievement answers how do I get more? And meaning answers a different question entirely. What does this mean? And no accumulation of the first ever answers the second. You cannot pay a debt in one currency with the coin of another, no matter how much of that coin you print. This is why a person can stand in the exact center of a full life and feel completely empty. It is not a contradiction. It is two separate ledgers. One can read full while the other reads zero, and our culture keeps handing us more entries for the first ledger and calling it progress, while the second, the one that decides whether a Tuesday feels alive or grey, goes untouched for years, sometimes a whole working life. And the frightening part is, a person can reach the very top of the first ledger and only then discover, with nothing left to distract them, that the second was never opened at all. So the second shift is this: stop measuring your life only in the ledger of more, and start asking, in this achievement, where is the meaning entry? Not the metric, the meaning. Ask it honestly, rather than assuming the second ledger fills itself once the first looks impressive enough, because it never has, and it never will. I stop confusing the size of my life with the sense of it. The third key is the one that reframes almost everything, and it begins with a sentence Jung wrote that sounds almost harsh until you sit with it. He wrote, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering," in volume 11 of his collected works. And I want to slow down here, because this is the actual mechanism behind the aimlessness we named in the first key. Jung noticed that human beings are built to suffer for something. That is simply the shape of a meaningful life. There is a cost, a struggle, a real difficulty faced honestly, and when that suffering is legitimate, when it is the actual cost of becoming who you are meant to become, it has direction, it has weight, it even has a strange dignity to it. But when a person avoids the legitimate suffering, when they will not face the hard conversation, will not leave the thing that has quietly stopped fitting them, will not admit the truth they already know, the psyche does not simply grant them a suffering-free life in exchange. Instead, it manufactures a substitute, a free-floating anxiety, a low static dread, an aimless irritability that seems to have no object. This is sterile suffering, pain with no direction, pain that does not build anything, and it is exhausting in a completely different way than legitimate suffering is exhausting. Legitimate suffering tires you the way a long climb tires you. Sterile suffering tires you the way running in place tires you. No ground covered, only depletion. Think of it as a debt that will not stop compounding, a debt the honest self owes and the guarded self keeps refinancing. Every month, you do not pay the principal, you pay a little interest instead. A headache with no cause, a short temper with no target, a Sunday evening dread that arrives before Sunday evening even does. And none of it reduces what is owed. It only rents you a little more time before the real conversation, the real leaving, the real admission, finally comes due. Let me walk 2 ordinary days through this, so it stops being an abstraction. First, imagine a woman who has known for over a year that the role she took no longer uses a single gift she actually has. She wakes already tired, not from the job itself, from the daily labor of pretending the job still fits. She is competent all morning, pleasant in every meeting, and by 2 in the afternoon, a fog settles over her desk that she cannot name and would be embarrassed to describe. She goes home. She is short with someone she loves over something small. She apologizes. She does not know why she was sharp. She was not sharp about the meeting. She was sharp about the year she has spent not leaving it. Second, imagine a man who has known for months that a friendship has quietly become a one-way arrangement. He senses it every time his phone shows that name. A small tightening before he even reads the message. He answers anyway, warmly, because naming the truth feels like more trouble than swallowing it again. And that tightening does not vanish when the conversation ends. It just moves. It turns into a low resentment he carries into completely unrelated rooms. Both of these people would say, if you ask them, that their lives feel aimless, foggy, faintly irritable for no clear reason. And Jung would say, there is nothing vague about it at all. The reason is entirely clear. It is simply unpaid. So pause for a moment here and pick one real thing, one truth you have been avoiding facing, one conversation postponed, one decision deferred, not to solve it tonight, only to name it. Because naming begins converting the sterile suffering back into legitimate suffering. And legitimate suffering, unlike static, actually goes somewhere. It has a far side. Static has no far side at all. It simply loops. This is the difference between the rough path and the smooth one. The smooth path in that image only appears easier. It is actually the one that circles back on itself endlessly, while the rough path, the one that costs something honestly and upfront, is the only one that ever arrives anywhere. I stop manufacturing static, and I let the real cost be paid. The fourth key is smaller in scale and larger in consequence than it first appears. Jung wrote, in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, the least of things with a meaning is worth more than the greatest of things without it. And I want you to sit with the size of that claim, because it contradicts how most of us think about purpose. We imagine purpose as enormous, a calling that announces itself with trumpets, so we wait for the enormous thing. And while we wait, we walk past 100 small things a week that could have carried meaning, and did not, only because we did not invest them with any. Imagine a father who believes meaning will arrive the day he is finally promoted. He tells himself, once I have arrived, then I will feel it. And every morning before that day he pours coffee for his daughter while she talks about a dream, half listening, already at his desk in his mind. The promotion comes. He feels something like satisfaction for exactly 1 afternoon, and then the static returns, quieter but unmistakably the same. And only years later does he realize the coffee mornings were the actual material. Small, repeatable, entirely available, spent waiting for something bigger instead of noticed for what they already were. This is the trap. We treat scale as the measure of meaning, when the real measure is attention. A negative develops the same way whether the photograph is of a mountain or a kitchen table. What determines the image is the care taken in developing it, not the size of the subject. The phone call made out of obligation versus made with full attention. Same 10 minutes, radically different weight. The meal cooked distracted versus cooked as an act of care. Same stove, entirely different meaning entry. Jung is not telling you to lower your ambitions. He is telling you meaning is a property of the honesty and presence you bring, not the size of the act. This is why a small kindness, fully present, can outweigh a large achievement done on autopilot. Try this: a list of things audit. At the end of one ordinary day, list the 5 smallest moments: the held door, the honest sentence, the 10 minutes actually listening, the coffee poured while truly present, and ask which had a person, a truth, a piece of care inside them, and which were simply performed. You will likely find the meaning you hunted at the horizon was available at close range all day, unclaimed, waiting only to be noticed rather than achieved. I stop waiting for the enormous thing, and I start noticing the small one already in my hand. The 5th key is the deepest one, and I want to turn the lens now, because until this point we have been speaking about people generally, the composite figures, the ordinary Tuesdays, but Jung's whole method only works when the lens turns to you specifically. So let us do that carefully, in 3 parts. First, consider the sterile suffering you personally have been carrying, not someone else's, yours, the static that hums under your particular days. And ask honestly, when did it begin? Most people, when they actually sit with this question rather than deflecting it, can name a season, a decision point, a fork in the road, where they chose the smoother path instead of the honest one. Jung would say, this is not a moral failing, it is simply what happens when legitimate suffering is declined. The psyche does not forget the debt, it simply changes its form and keeps presenting the bill. This is the sterile suffering, and you likely know exactly what specific unfaced thing it is standing in for. Even if you have not said it aloud in years, imagine a woman, call her a composite, because this is the shape of many, not one patient. She works in a role she took 8 years ago because it was sensible, and somewhere around year 3 she felt the fit begin to loosen. A small wrongness, easy to ignore. She told herself it was a phase. She told herself, everyone feels this way sometimes, and she kept telling herself that for 5 more years. Meanwhile, a low static crept into her Sundays first, that particular dread before a week begins, and then it spread into her mornings, into the drive home, into the quiet minute before sleep. She could not name what was wrong, because on paper nothing was wrong. And this is exactly how sterile suffering hides. It does not announce its source. It only asks for daily rent, and she paid that rent for years, without ever asking what the actual debt behind it was. Second, consider what the legitimate suffering underneath it would actually cost you if you faced it directly, and be honest about the size of that cost, because Jung never romanticized this part. Facing the real thing is not gentle. It may cost you a comfortable identity, a relationship built on an old arrangement, a self-image you have protected carefully. For the woman in our story, the honest cost was frightening, precisely because it was ordinary. It meant admitting to herself first, and eventually to others, that the sensible choice had quietly stopped being true. It meant the discomfort of a conversation she had rehearsed and cancelled in her mind 100 times. It meant the risk of disappointing people whose good opinion she had built years of identity around. This is exactly why the substitute suffering gets manufactured in the first place. The psyche, in a strange way, is trying to protect you from a cost it senses you are not ready to pay. But here is the turn. The static costs you too. Every single day, it simply spreads the payment out in small, quiet installments, instead of one honest lump sum. And installments paid forever add up to more than the lump sum ever would have. This is the arithmetic Jung wanted us to see clearly. Avoidance is not free, it is financed, and the interest rate is your aliveness. Count it plainly if you want to see it clearly. A small daily tax of dread multiplied across 1,000 ordinary days is a fortune of feeling spent on nothing, while the one honest conversation, however frightening, is a single payment, made once, and then finished third. Consider what actually happens on the far side of facing it, and this is the part most people never get told, because it is not a lightning bolt of purpose descending from above, it is quieter than that. When a person finally has the honest conversation, finally leaves the thing that stopped fitting, finally admits the truth to themselves that they had been managing around for years, meaning does not arrive as an announcement, it arrives as a byproduct. The static simply stops humming, because there is no longer a debt for it to represent. The woman in our story did not describe her turning point as triumphant. She described it as strangely dull, an ordinary Tuesday where she finally said the sentence she had rehearsed for years. And nothing exploded. The sky did not open, but that night for the first time in a long while she slept without the low hum underneath her thoughts, and into that new quiet ordinary Tuesdays start to have weight again, not because a grand calling appeared, but because the false weight was finally removed, and the real ground became visible underneath. This is what Jung meant when he distinguished sterile suffering from fertile suffering. Fertile suffering is suffering with a shape, an end, a direction. It is the ache of the climb rather than the ache of running in place. And once you are climbing rather than pacing, purpose stops being a thing you search for and becomes simply the name for the direction you are already walking. Notice too that this is never a single dramatic threshold crossed once and finished. It is closer to a series of small, honest doors, some large, most small, each one asking the same quiet question: will you pay the real cost today, or the static's cost instead? And each door answered honestly makes the next one slightly easier to find. So here is the honest exercise. Not tonight, but this week. Name one place where you suspect a legitimate suffering has been declined. One conversation, one decision, one truth. And instead of asking, how do I fix this? Ask, what would it cost me to simply stop avoiding it? Sit with that cost, without acting on it yet, only naming it. Because Jung believed naming the true cost honestly is itself the first act of facing it. And I want to say this gently, because this audience deserves gentleness here. This is not therapy, and I am not offering you a diagnosis. This is reflection, a kind of self-education. Jung believed every person has the right to undertake, if what surfaces feels heavier than reflection can hold. A conversation with someone qualified to sit with you in it is not a failure. It is simply the appropriate next room to walk into. I stop paying the static slow interest, and I choose the honest cost instead. The sixth key is the warmest one, and it returns us exactly to where we began tonight. Because after naming the static and the debt and the honest cost, I do not want to leave you standing only in the weight of it. Jung wrote that the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. And notice again, he did not say, find the light, he said, kindle it, which means the material was never missing from your life. It was only untended. Picture an ordinary evening, not a crisis, not a breakthrough, simply an evening. You come home, the day already behind you, the static perhaps still faintly humming under your ribs, and on the counter sits a small stack of unopened mail, a message you have been meaning to answer honestly instead of politely, a dish left from the morning that needs washing before it hardens. None of these are purpose in the grand sense you were taught to expect, and yet each one is exactly the kindling Jung meant. The fire is never built from some rare and enormous log delivered from outside your life. It is built from the ordinary material already sitting on your counter, the honest reply instead of the polite one, the dish washed with attention instead of resentment, the 10 minutes given fully to the person waiting for you instead of half given while your mind drifts elsewhere. Widen the same evening a little further. The kindling is not only in the tasks, it is in the noticing itself. The way the kitchen light falls across the table while you eat something simple. The way a voice on the phone actually reaches you instead of passing through you. The way a small apology, offered without excuse, settles something between two people that had been quietly straining for weeks. None of this will appear on any resume, and Jung would say that is precisely the point. The ledger that measures a life well lit was never the ledger the world hands out awards for. Imagine two versions of that same evening, side by side. In the first, every small task is performed on autopilot, the mail ignored again, the apology swallowed rather than spoken, and the day simply ends as flat as it began. In the second, one truth is spoken instead of avoided, one task done with real attention, one small tenderness offered rather than withheld, and something in the chest quietly settles. That settling is the actual fire Jung was pointing toward. And here is the mercy in it. You do not need a new life to begin this. You do not need the horizon to finally arrive. You only need tonight's ordinary material and a willingness to tend it, rather than wait for something grander to appear in its place. This is why the sole purpose he named was to kindle, not to conquer, not to arrive, simply to tend, again and again, one unremarkable evening at a time. I stop waiting for a life already lit, and I tend the small flame in front of me tonight. Here is the whole picture. Purpose was never lost, so it cannot be found. Only kindled. Meaning and achievement are two separate ledgers, and only one of them can actually warm a Tuesday. The static you carry is not random. It is sterile suffering, standing in for a legitimate suffering you have been declining to pay. The small things carry more weight than the large ones, once real attention enters them. And the lens, in the end, was always meant to turn back to you, not to explain other people's emptiness, but to name your own honestly enough to finally begin paying the real cost instead of the endless small one. Every key here was really one key turning. The recognition that a light already in your hands is worth more than a horizon you have never reached. And that recognition, once it lands, does not ask you to become someone else, only to stop running from what you already, quietly, know. I stop hunting for a purpose out there, and I start kindling the one already in my hands. Say it with me. I stop hunting for a purpose out there, and I start kindling the one already in my hands. Again, I stop hunting for a purpose out there, and I start kindling the one already in my hands. So if you came here tonight, asking why you cannot find your purpose, perhaps the gentlest answer Jung ever gave is simply this: it was never lost. It was only waiting to be kindled. So tell me, what is the one small, honest log you can place on the fire tomorrow